The farmhouse always seemed quieter after midnight, as if the world outside had stopped to catch its breath. The only sounds were the faint creak of the old wood floor and the occasional rustle of the wind against the window panes. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts chasing themselves in circles. The week had been uneventful, the days bleeding into one another in the way only long summer vacations could. My parents had sent me here to spend time with family, and though I'd been grateful for the change of scenery, the isolation had begun to wear on me. The nights, especially, felt endless. But then there was him, Ryan. My cousin had always been larger than life to me, 2 years older, taller, sharper in every way that mattered. Where I felt hesitant, he moved through the world with a kind of easy confidence that I envied. Spending time with him was exhilarating, but it also left me feeling unmoored, like I was constantly struggling to keep up. And lately, there had been something else, something I couldn't quite name but felt in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. In the way his hand lingered on my shoulder when we laughed at a joke only the two of us found funny. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into the smallest things. But the more time we spent together, the harder it was to ignore the knot of tension tightening in my chest whenever he was near. I rolled onto my side, willing myself to sleep, but the thoughts wouldn't stop. The house was still, the kind of stillness that felt heavy, almost oppressive. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness swallow me when I heard it, a soft knock at the door. "Yeah?" I called out, my voice hoarse with sleep. The door creaked open, and Ryan stepped inside. He was backlit by the faint glow of the hallway light, his features cast in shadow, but I didn't need to see him to know it was him. "Hey," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "Did I wake you?" "No," I lied, sitting up and rubbing my eyes. "What's up?" He hesitated, his hand resting on the doorknob before crossing the room to sit on the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, and I felt my pulse quicken at the closeness. "I couldn't sleep," he said finally, his voice low. "Thought I'd see if you were still up." "Oh." I didn't know what else to say. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of why he was here, in my room, in the middle of the night. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, though his tone didn't match his words. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and for a moment he didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and full of things neither of us seemed ready to voice. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost hesitant. "Do you ever think about, I don't know, things you can't say out loud?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" He turned to look at me then, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Just things you feel, but you can't explain, or maybe you're scared to." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. The intensity of his gaze pinned me in place, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. "Ryan." "Forget it," he said quickly, cutting me off. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I'm being stupid. Sorry for waking you." He started to get up, but I reached out without thinking, my hand catching his arm. "Wait." He froze, his eyes flicking to where my hand rested against his skin. For a moment, neither of us moved. The room felt impossibly small, the air between us charged with something I didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Ryan exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging as though under a weight he couldn't carry alone. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "I just needed to see you." His words hung in the air between us, soft but heavy, like a thread stretched too tight. My hand still rested on his arm, and though my first instinct was to pull back, I didn't. Instead, I let it linger, my fingers curling slightly against the fabric of his sleeve. Ryan didn't move. He just sat there, his gaze fixed on the floor, his expression unreadable. It felt like he was waiting for something, for me to say something, or maybe to make a choice I wasn't sure I understood. "You can talk to me," I said finally, my voice quiet but steady. "Whatever it is, I'm here." He let out a soft, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because it's not something I can just say." He looked at me then, and the vulnerability in his eyes made my breath catch. "You wouldn't get it. Try me." Ryan studied me for a long moment, his jaw tight, like he was waging some internal battle. Then, slowly, he reached up to rub the back of his neck, a nervous habit I'd seen 100 times before. But this time, it felt different, more deliberate. "I've been trying to figure this out," he said finally, his voice so low I had to strain to hear him. "Trying to make sense of it. But I can't." I frowned, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward again, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together tightly as if he was holding himself together. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more hesitant. "Do you ever feel like you don't know where you fit? Like, there's this part of you that doesn't make sense no matter how hard you try to figure it out?" His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I knew that feeling, had known it for as long as I could remember. The nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering why I felt different, why I couldn't be like everyone else. The fear of what people would think if they knew the truth. "Yeah," I said softly. "I get that." Ryan glanced at me out of the corner of his eye like he wasn't sure if he believed me. "You do?" "Yeah," I said again, more firmly this time. "I know what it's like to feel different, to not know how to talk about it, or if you even should." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just complicated. I don't even know if I can explain it." "You don't have to," I said gently. "Not if you're not ready." Ryan turned to look at me fully then, and the intensity of his gaze made my pulse quicken. "What if I'm tired of not saying it?" The question caught me off guard, and I felt my throat tighten. "Then say it," I said, the words trembling on my lips. "Whatever it is, just say it." He hesitated, his eyes searching mine like he was looking for permission. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine where it still rested on his arm. The touch was so light I almost didn't feel it, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't think it's something you want to hear," he said quietly. "Let me decide that." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, in one swift motion, he stood up, pacing across the room. He ran both hands through his hair, letting out a frustrated sigh. "I shouldn't have come in here," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "This was a mistake." "Ryan, wait!" I scrambled to my feet, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "Whatever's going on, you don't have to go through it alone. You can talk to me." "It's not that simple," he said again, his voice rough. "You don't get it. If I say it, everything changes, and I don't know if I can deal with that." The pain in his voice twisted something inside me, and before I could think, I reached out, grabbing his arm. "Then don't think about everything," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Just think about now, about me." His eyes locked on mine, wide and full of something I couldn't name but felt deep in my chest. Slowly, his hand came up to rest over mine, his touch warm and steady. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "So am I," said. "But we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Just start with whatever you're feeling right now." Ryan exhaled shakily, his gaze dropping to where our hands were joined. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he spoke. "I don't know how to stop thinking about you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've tried, but I can't. Every time we're together, it's like I can't breathe. But it's not just that. It's the way you look at me, the way you laugh, the way you make me feel like I'm not alone." He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and longing. "It scares the hell out of me." I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt, his words echoing in my ears. Part of me wanted to tell him to stop, to pretend he hadn't said it, but the other part, the part I'd buried deep down for years, wanted to tell him I felt the same. Ryan. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, my chest tight. Don't, he said quickly, his voice thick with emotion. You don't have to say anything. I needed you to know. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. My heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice, and before I could stop myself, I stepped closer, my hand still on his arm. You don't have to go through this alone, I said softly. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. Ryan's eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought he might pull away. But then, slowly, he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. His breath was warm against my skin, and I felt my heart pound in my chest. I don't know what I'm doing, he whispered. Me neither, I admitted. But maybe that's okay. For a long moment we stayed like that, the silence between us filled with unspoken words. And then, slowly, Ryan's hand came up to cup my face, his touch hesitant but steady. Tell me to stop, he said softly. I couldn't. The words caught in my throat, suspended in the heavy air between us. My lips parted to speak, but no sound came out. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, whether I wanted to stop this or let it happen. But Ryan's hand stayed on my face, warm and steady, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. I didn't tell him to stop. Ryan's gaze held mine, searching for something, though I wasn't sure what. His breathing was uneven, shallow, and I could feel the tension radiating from him in waves. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he leaned closer, his forehead still resting against mine. The space between us shrank until I could feel the faint warmth of his breath against my lips. Tell me if this is wrong, he whispered, his voice trembling, and I could hear the fear laced in his words. I don't want to hurt you. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might drown out the silence. It's not wrong, I said, the words slipping out before I could second-guess them. I don't know what it is, but it's not wrong. A flicker of relief crossed his face, but it was fleeting, replaced almost immediately by the weight of uncertainty. He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling softly before opening them again. I don't want to ruin this, he said, his voice barely audible. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said, my own voice trembling now. We'll figure it out. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, Ryan tilted his head, his lips brushing against mine in the lightest, most tentative kiss I'd ever experienced. It was almost as if he was testing the waters, waiting for me to pull away or push him back. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned into him, letting my eyes close as the kiss deepened, soft and unhurried. His hand slid from my face to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling gently in my hair. The kiss was warm, careful, as though he was afraid of breaking something fragile. I felt a shiver run down my spine, my chest tightening with a mix of emotions I couldn't name. There was fear, yes, fear of what this meant, of what might come next, but there was also something else, something deeper, more powerful, something I didn't want to let go of. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads still pressed together. Ryan's hand lingered on the back of my neck, his thumb brushing against my skin in slow, soothing circles. Are you okay? He asked softly, his voice full of concern. Yeah, I said, though my voice came out shakier than I'd intended. I'm just processing. Ryan nodded, his gaze dropping to where his other hand rested on my arm. Me too, he admitted. This is a lot. It is, I agreed, my heart still racing, but I don't want it to stop. His eyes snapped back to mine, wide and searching. You don't? I shook my head, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. No, I said softly. I don't. The relief that crossed his face this time was unmistakable. and I felt my chest tighten at the sight of it. He exhaled shakily, his grip on my neck loosening slightly, though he didn't let go. "I was so scared," he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know what I thought. That you'd hate me. That you'd think I was disgusting." I felt a pang of sadness at his words, and without thinking, I reached up to cup his face in my hands. "I could never hate you," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "Never." Ryan closed his eyes, leaning into my touch, and for a moment it felt like the weight of the world had lifted from his shoulders. When he opened them again, they were softer, warmer, and I felt my breath catch at the intensity of his gaze. "Can I kiss you again?" he asked, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "Yes," I said, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. This time the kiss wasn't hesitant or tentative. It was deeper, more deliberate, as though the dam that had been holding us back had finally broken. Ryan's hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt a rush of heat spread through me at the contact. My own hands slid up to his shoulders, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt as I kissed him back with just as much urgency. The room felt smaller, the air around us charged with an intensity that was both thrilling and terrifying. Every touch, every movement felt like a revelation, like we were discovering something neither of us had known we needed but couldn't live without. When we broke apart again, we were both breathless, our faces flushed. Ryan's hands stayed on my waist, his thumbs brushing against my sides in slow, soothing motions. "This feels so real," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. "I didn't think it would feel like this." "Me neither," I admitted, my own voice shaking with emotion. "But it does." For a long moment we just stood there, holding on to each other, letting the silence fill the space between us. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was warm, comforting, like the calm after a storm. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of emotions I couldn't fully understand, but I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to let go. "Do you think we can do this?" Ryan asked finally, his voice tentative. "I mean, us. Do you think we can make it work?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I want to try." His smile was small but genuine, and I felt my heart skip a beat at the sight of it. "Me too," he said softly. "I want to try too." The weight of his words settled over me, warm and reassuring, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe. Whatever came next, I knew we would face it together. The minutes that followed felt suspended in time. We didn't say much, but we didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the unspoken understanding between us, the fragile, tentative connection we had both acknowledged but hadn't yet named. Ryan's hands stayed on my waist, his thumbs brushing idly against the fabric of my shirt, and I felt myself relax into the warmth of his touch. The glow of the moonlight streaming through the window cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the softness in his eyes. I'd never seen him like this before. So open, so unguarded, and it made my chest tighten in a way that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally, my voice breaking the quiet but staying low, like I was afraid to disturb the fragile moment between us. "Anything," Ryan replied, his voice just as soft. "When did you—" I hesitated, unsure of how to phrase it. "When did you start feeling like this? About me, I mean?" His gaze flicked downward for a moment, and I saw his throat work as he swallowed. "I don't know exactly," he admitted, his tone tinged with uncertainty. "It wasn't something I planned or even wanted to feel. It just happened." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Me too," I murmured almost to myself. Ryan's eyes lifted to meet mine again, searching. "You felt it too?" "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier now. I didn't want to admit it. Not to myself, not to anyone. But it was always there. I just didn't know what to do with it. The relief in his expression was palpable, and he exhaled a shaky breath. "I thought I was crazy," he said with a faint laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I kept telling myself it was wrong, that I needed to stop thinking about you like that. But no matter what I did, I couldn't make it go away." "You're not crazy," I said quickly, reaching up to touch his face again. The stubble on his jaw was rough under my fingertips, grounding me in the reality of the moment. "I don't think I could make it go away either, and I'm not sure I want to." Ryan's eyes softened, and he leaned into my touch, his hands tightening slightly on my waist. "I don't want to either," he said softly. "But what do we do now? Where do we go from here?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with uncertainty. I didn't have an answer, not one that felt safe or easy, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want this to end. Not now, not ever. "We figure it out," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "Together." His lips curved into a small, tentative smile, and he nodded. "Together," he echoed. For a long moment we stayed like that, our foreheads resting against each other, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. It felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us, and I found myself wishing I could freeze time, hold on to this moment forever. But the weight of reality was impossible to ignore. As much as I wanted to stay in this bubble we'd created, I knew we couldn't hide from the world forever. Eventually, we'd have to face the questions, the doubts, the what-ifs. But for now, I wanted to let myself feel this, feel him, without worrying about what came next. "Can I stay?" Ryan asked suddenly, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. I pulled back just enough to look at him, my brows furrowing. "Stay." "In here," he clarified, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Just for tonight. I don't want to go back to my room. Not after this." I hesitated, not because I didn't want him to stay, but because the thought of waking up next to him, of sharing something as simple and intimate as falling asleep in the same space, felt almost too much to handle. But when I looked into his eyes and saw the vulnerability there, I knew I couldn't say no. "Yeah," I said softly. "You can stay." Ryan exhaled a breath I hadn't realized he was holding, and his shoulders relaxed. "Thank you," he murmured. I moved to sit back on the bed, and he followed, the mattress dipping under our combined weight. We settled side by side at first, our shoulders brushing, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. Then, slowly, Ryan shifted, lying back against the pillows and reaching out to pull me down beside him. The closeness was almost overwhelming, but I let myself lean into it, resting my head against his chest. I could hear the steady thump of his heartbeat beneath my ear, and the sound was strangely soothing. His arm came around me, holding me securely, and I felt myself relax in a way I hadn't in what felt like years. "This feels different," Ryan said after a while, his voice low and thoughtful. "But good." "Yeah," I agreed, my own voice barely above a whisper. "Good." We didn't say much after that. The quiet stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we couldn't put into words, everything we were still figuring out. Eventually, the steady rhythm of Ryan's breathing began to lull me towards sleep, and I let myself drift, secure in the warmth of his arms. The morning light filtering through the window woke me before I was ready, and for a moment I forgot where I was. But then I felt the warmth of Ryan's body beside me, the weight of his arm draped over my waist, and the memories of the night before came rushing back. I turned my head slightly to look at him, my chest tightening at the sight of his face so peaceful in sleep. His features were relaxed, the usual tension gone, and I felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude, fear, hope, twist in my chest. As if sensing my gaze, Ryan stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment he looked disoriented, but then his gaze found mine, and a soft smile curved his lips. "Hey," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Hey," I said, my own smile tentative. For a while we just lay there, neither of us in a hurry to move or break the fragile peace of the moment. But eventually, the reality of the world outside began to creep back in, and I felt the weight of unspoken questions settle over us. "What happens now?" I asked softly, my voice barely audible. Ryan's smile faded slightly, and he looked thoughtful. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't regret last night. And I don't think I ever will." "Me neither," I said, my heart aching at the sincerity in his voice. He reached out then, his fingers brushing against mine, and I felt a flicker of hope amidst the uncertainty. Whatever came next, whatever challenges we'd have to face, I knew we'd face them together. And for now, that was enough.